The night burned without warning. Shots cracked through the border wind, slicing the silence of Ciudad Juárez. Sirens wailed too late. By dawn, the asphalt was painted red. 2 police officers and 1 cartel lieutenant lay dead. But this was no random bloodbath. It was an execution, clinical, organized, and carried out with military precision. Who gave the order? And why now, when tensions along the US-Mexico border have never been closer to explosion? Authorities identified the fallen men as Miguel Eduardo Gallego Salas and Rigoberto Pulido Escobedo. Officers caught between 2 worlds, law enforcement and a narco-empire that doesn't recognize borders. Beside them, the body of Ulysses Delta I Trujillo, a high-ranking enforcer of La Línea, was found riddled with bullets. Witnesses said the attackers arrived in silence, headlights off, firing in bursts so tight it sounded like a drill. Not a street crime, but a message. Investigators later linked the killings to a rising faction calling itself La Empresa. Born from the remnants of La Línea, it had grown into something far more sophisticated, a hybrid force of traffickers and paramilitaries. Extortion, smuggling, human trafficking, their business runs deeper than any border wall. The discovery of an underground tunnel connecting Juárez to El Paso only confirmed what US agents already feared. Cartel logistics now rival those of insurgent groups. For Washington, the symbolism was impossible to ignore. A cartel hit conducted with tactical discipline, targeting both criminals and law enforcement, revealed a new phase in Mexico's shadow war. Analysts at Jane's Defense Weekly compared the operation's coordination to urban guerrilla tactics, while a DW report noted that Juárez police now patrol as if deployed in hostile territory. And yet, this outbreak of violence is only one front in a much larger picture. Across the globe, hybrid warfare blurs the lines between crime and combat. In Ukraine, mercenary formations mix military command with criminal enterprise. In the Middle East, Iran-backed militias control smuggling routes that rival Mexico's cartels in revenue. Even in the Indo-Pacific, Chinese triads have merged with cyber syndicates, exploiting instability for profit and influence. The border war is no longer just about drugs, it's a geopolitical test of sovereignty. But amid this escalation, the human toll remains staggering. Migrants crossing the Rio Grande now face not only desert heat, but armed checkpoints run by cartels. Families vanish without trace. Mothers wait for calls that never come. Reuters reports that over 27 migrant remains were found along Texas's desert routes this year alone. Many believed to be victims of cartel violence, not the elements. If cartels are operating with military discipline and global reach, how much longer before this shadow war crosses fully onto US soil? Can President Trump's promise to treat cartels as enemy combatants restore control? Or will it ignite a conflict the border can no longer contain? In Juárez, whispers of La Empresa spread like wildfire. Locals said the group didn't just take over La Línea's rackets, they redefined them. Surveillance drones, encrypted communications, tactical discipline. They moved like soldiers, not smugglers. Within months, La Empresa transformed from a ghost name into Mexico's most feared cartel syndicate. But who funds them? And how did a faction born from chaos rise with such order? According to an internal intelligence brief shared with Reuters and later echoed by The Guardian, La Empresa operates as a hybrid cartel, structured like a corporation, armed like a militia. Their hierarchy mimics military command. Commanders, lieutenants, logistics officers, and even press liaisons who control social media disinformation. What began as an offshoot enforcing the Juárez cartel's decrees has evolved into a parallel power structure, filling the vacuum left by collapsing local governance. Inside their territory, La Empresa enforces curfews, taxes, and punishments. Kidnapping is no longer opportunistic, it's systematic. Migrants become currency. Those who can't pay are sold to other networks or forced into labor. BBC reports describe stash houses where dozens are held in suffocating rooms, waiting to be trafficked north. In one raid, Mexican authorities found 25 migrants, 8 women, 2 minors, crammed behind steel bars, their freedom priced in US dollars. But it's not just about human smuggling. La Empresa has turned cross-border logistics into a military operation. Intelligence sources cited by Jane's Defense Weekly note that their weapons supply lines trace back to Central America's black markets, surplus M16 and grenade launchers diverted from old wars, resurfacing in Mexico's border states. Add to that night vision gear, armored vehicles, and digital jammers, and what emerges is not a cartel, but an army, one that answers to no flag. Strategically, this represents a new challenge for both nations. For the US, these cartels no longer behave like organized crime, but like insurgent entities, with territorial ambitions and political influence. For Mexico, it's a war it cannot officially declare. The state risks losing legitimacy in regions where La Empresa offers security faster than police can respond. Globally, the pattern is disturbingly familiar. In the Donbass, paramilitary groups evolved into political movements. In southern Lebanon, Hezbollah blurred lines between state and militia. And now, along the Rio Grande, criminal networks have become de facto authorities, taxing trade, controlling migration, even negotiating truces. What happens when such groups no longer fear governments, but compete with them? Civilians, as always, are the ones trapped in the crossfire. DW recently interviewed survivors from a Juárez neighborhood where La Empresa carried out a home invasion so brutal that it silenced an entire block. A family murdered, neighbors too afraid to attend the funeral. Fear has become governance. Silence the new law. Experts warned that La Empresa's rise could shift the balance of power at the US-Mexico frontier. If a cartel can act with military precision, control migration routes, and dictate local order, then who really governs the borderlands? Is it the government or the new warlords of globalization's underworld? When dawn broke over Juárez, Operation Black Warrior began. Sirens echoed through the city as armored vehicles rolled toward the outskirts, kicking up clouds of dust. Police and federal agents moved in waves, raiding safe houses suspected of harboring cartel cells. It was Mexico's boldest counterstrike in months, a display meant to prove that the state still held control. But control, as the next hours would show, was an illusion. Within the first day, officers seized over 40 firearms, dozens of tactical vests, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. In one raid, they discovered 3 migrants chained in a dark room, waiting for ransom calls that would never come. The men guarding them weren't desperate street criminals, they were cartel soldiers, young, trained, and calm under fire. The Guardian described the scene as a paramilitary cell hiding in plain sight. Authorities announced 10 arrests. State television aired the footage, officers marching the handcuffed suspects before cameras, weapons lined up like trophies. But for every man captured, 5 more watched from the shadows. The cartels had learned long ago that fear travels faster than justice. That night, while Juárez celebrated a victory, gunmen in another neighborhood torched 2 police vehicles. A warning had been sent. You hit 1, we hit 5. The deeper the raids went, the clearer the pattern became. La Empresa wasn't just reacting, it was adapting. Intelligence shared with Defense News revealed that intercepted communications pointed to military-style coordination across regions, suggesting the use of ex-police and former special forces operatives as trainers. What began as a local crackdown was morphing into a regional war of attrition. President Donald Trump, speaking from the White House, condemned the killings and reaffirmed America's stance. Cartel violence will be treated as terrorism. Behind closed doors, Washington pushed for greater intelligence sharing and signaled readiness to deploy drones near the border under expanded surveillance authority. For Trump, Black Warrior became more than a Mexican operation. It was a test of his doctrine that borders must be defended not only with walls, but with will. But for the officers on the ground, it was survival, not politics. In Juárez, uniforms no longer guaranteed safety. Families of police officers fled to El Paso, fearing retaliation. BBC correspondents reported a surge in asylum applications filed by Mexican law enforcement families. For them, Black Warrior's success came at a price: measured in funerals. This confrontation reflected a global shift, the blurring between domestic policing and counterinsurgency. The same principles used in Mosul or Donetsk were now applied in Mexican cities. Urban mapping, drone reconnaissance, psychological operations. The battlefield had moved closer to America's doorstep. And still, the human cost mounted. One Juárez officer told reporters his partner's last words over the radio before their car was ambushed. They're not running anymore. They're hunting. That sentence now defines Mexico's crisis. Strategically, experts warned the state is fighting an enemy that regenerates faster than it bleeds. Al Jazeera called it the Hydra effect. Cut off one head, two more appear. The arrests under Black Warrior may slow the tide, but they cannot stem it. As the sun set over the Rio Grande, the question became painfully clear. If cartels have evolved into armies, can Mexico still win a war it never officially declared? Or is Black Warrior only exposed that the line between state and shadow state is already gone? The violence didn't stop in Juárez. It metastasized. Days after Black Warrior, the same brutality erupted hundreds of miles away in Tamaulipas. A white van sped toward a national defense convoy. Soldiers opened fire. 6 civilians dead. Official reports called it an operational accident, but locals called it what it was, a massacre. Cell phone footage shared with Reuters showed bullet-riddled vehicles and soldiers staring into the dark, stunned. Mexico's government promised an investigation, but few believed justice would follow. Then came Chiapas. 5 police officers ambushed and executed near Frontera Comalapa, their patrol car set ablaze, the fire still burning when rescue units arrived. The attackers were believed to be members of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, the most militarized narco force in Latin America. In Sinaloa, rival factions of Los Chapitos and La Maiza turned city blocks into war zones. 50 officers killed this year. One, Jorge Luis Casillas Torres, gunned down while driving home. His death wasn't random. It was a statement. The state cannot protect its own. DW described the chaos as fragmented sovereignty, a term once used for failed states like Libya or Syria. Mexico now faces that same specter. Pockets of power where the rule of law ends and the rule of fear begins. Each cartel operates like a microstate, complete with armies, tax systems, and territorial borders. And these borders are fluid, bleeding into each other like spilled gasoline. The United States watches uneasily. Border security briefings warn that crossfire from these turf wars is creeping north. Smugglers and armed scouts have been spotted deeper in U.S. territory, from Arizona to New Mexico. The Pentagon quietly reinforced surveillance drones along the Rio Grande under directives approved by President Trump in early 2025. Publicly, Washington calls it enhanced monitoring. Privately, it's preparation for escalation. Globally, the parallels grow sharper. In Ukraine, mercenary companies fight state armies. In Lebanon, militias and government forces share neighborhoods. In Gaza, armed groups control entire economies. The same template now spreads through Latin America. Decentralized power, privatized violence, monetized fear. Analysts at Jane's Defense Weekly warn that the Mexican cartels have evolved into hybrid warfare entities, operating like Hezbollah with cocaine instead of ideology. But amid the strategy and geopolitics lies the unbearable human weight. Migrants trying to reach the US now face a gauntlet of death. The Guardian reports over 27 mass graves uncovered in the desert since 2024. Many belonging to those who paid the wrong guide or crossed the wrong route. Families across Honduras and Guatemala received the same phone call. We have your son. Send $3,000 or we'll send him back in a bag. The violence no longer follows logic. It sustains itself. Terror becomes a currency. And as the flames of Juárez spread to Tamaulipas, Chiapas, and Sinaloa, one thing is certain. This is not a series of isolated crimes. It's a war without borders, fought by armies without flags. For Washington, the question looms. How long before the bloodshed south of the border demands action north of it? How long before the battlefields of Reynosa and Culiacan become extensions of America's own war on terror? At a press conference that shook Washington, President Donald Trump didn't mince words. The cartels are enemy combatants, and America is at war. For the first time in modern history, the United States formally invoked the language of armed conflict against criminal networks. A classified White House memo, confirmed by Reuters and Defense News, declared cartel drug trafficking an act of war and authorized limited military operations under presidential war powers. The Pentagon moved fast. Within weeks, 8 U.S. warships repositioned in the Caribbean Sea, flanked by over 5,000 Marines and sailors. Their mission? Intercept cartel maritime routes. 5 suspected narco vessels were destroyed in targeted strikes. The message was clear. Washington would no longer chase smugglers in courtrooms, it would hunt them on the open sea. But the shift didn't stop there. According to The Guardian and Al Jazeera, Trump quietly expanded the CIA's covert authorities, granting permission for lethal operations beyond intelligence gathering. Armed surveillance drones, once used exclusively in counterterrorism missions, began flying over northern Mexico. To the public, it was monitoring cartel logistics. To insiders, it looked like the dawn of a new kind of war. Strategically, this move marks the culmination of Trump's doctrine, the fusion of counterterrorism and border defense. Analysts at Jane's Defense Weekly called it a paradigm shift comparable to the early post-9/11 playbook. The enemy no longer wears a uniform, but commands territory, extorts populations, and controls supply chains that feed America's overdose crisis. Washington now views cartels as non-state actors, insurgencies that must be defeated, not negotiated with. Critics, however, warned that the line between law enforcement and warfare is evaporating. DW reported growing concern among European allies that U.S. drone operations could destabilize Mexico's fragile political balance, pushing cartels to retaliate with urban terror tactics. Yet for Trump's administration, hesitation is no longer an option. In his own words, if they act like terrorists, we'll treat them like terrorists. The escalation mirrors the world's broader descent into hybrid conflict. In Ukraine, drones have turned small militias into strategic actors. In the Persian Gulf, Israel's shadow war with Iran operates through proxies and precision strikes. In East Asia, China uses cyber mercenaries instead of soldiers. America's southern border is becoming another theater in this global experiment, a frontier where military power collides with criminal chaos. Meanwhile, the moral dilemma deepens. Every drone that targets a cartel convoy risks collateral damage: civilians, migrants, or hostages. The Guardian recently documented cases of misidentified targets during joint Mexican operations, fueling protests and diplomatic rifts. Yet inside Washington, the calculus remains brutal. Inaction costs more lives than precision warfare. Across Mexico, cartels responded with defiance. Convoys of masked gunmen paraded through towns, displaying banners mocking U.S. threats. A video surfaced on Telegram showing CJNG fighters firing machine guns into the air, beside a message painted on a wall. War? Then war it is. And so, the border has become a living fault line, between state and insurgency, between order and anarchy, between two nations bound by violence and trade. The United States has drawn its line in the sand, but can war end what corruption created? Or will it simply export Mexico's firestorm northward, one drone strike at a time? Even under bombardment, the cartels adapt faster than governments can legislate. Intelligence from Reuters and BBC confirms what US agencies have quietly admitted. The cartels are mutating into digital empires. From crypto laundering to drone hacking, they've turned technology into their newest weapon. The Sinaloa cartel and CJNG no longer rely solely on drug routes. They control crypto wallets, dark web markets, and cross-border shell companies. The battlefield has shifted from the desert to the data stream. Cartel accountants now speak in Bitcoin, not pesos. Investigations by The Guardian reveal blockchain transactions tied to fentanyl shipments and offshore crypto mixers shielding billions from detection. These are not primitive gangs, but high-tech conglomerates armed with code, encryption, and artificial intelligence tools that track law enforcement movements in real time. One intercepted message read, "The drones are back. Adjust the heat maps." Inside the US, Trump's counter-cartel task force is racing to match that sophistication. The Pentagon and CIA have begun integrating cyber warfare units into Operation Iron Shield, a joint campaign aimed at disabling cartel communications and crypto flows. Defense News reports that AI-driven systems are being deployed to trace financial links across continents, from Sinaloa to Dubai, from Guadalajara to Shanghai. Yet, every time one network is shut down, two more emerge. The Hydra lives on, reborn in code. Strategically, the transformation of these criminal syndicates into digital insurgencies poses a long-term challenge to US power. They are not just enemies of law enforcement, they are competitors in sovereignty. In several Mexican regions, cartels provide jobs, internet access, and even protection taxes that function like governance. In parts of Michoacán, they distribute food and medicine, winning loyalty where the state has vanished. DW called it parallel governance through fear and necessity. Globally, this evolution echoes conflicts elsewhere. Iran-backed cyber units wage disinformation wars while financing militias. Chinese networks use commercial fronts for espionage. And now, Latin American cartels exploit crypto to fund their arsenals. The frontier between crime and warfare has collapsed, replaced by a digital gray zone where bullets meet algorithms. Yet beneath the geopolitics, human stories persist. Families in Juárez still bury their dead under police escort. Migrants still vanish in the sands of Sonora, their GPS signals disappearing mid-journey. Artists and civilians, from the murdered band Grupo Fugitivo to countless unnamed victims, serve as reminders that beneath every statistic lies a heartbeat silenced by impunity. Trump's war doctrine may have redrawn the map of enforcement, but it cannot yet redraw the human cost. As one US intelligence analyst told Al Jazeera, "We can hit their convoys, their crypto, their leaders, but not their fear. Fear is what they trade in, and fear is winning." The border now stands as the front line of a global experiment, a war fought with drones and data, soldiers and smugglers, policy and panic. America faces its oldest dilemma in a new form: how to defend freedom without becoming what it fears most, a nation forever at war. So the question remains, can this conflict ever truly end? Or will the border become the line where democracy learns its final lesson? That control, once lost, can never be taken back. The cartel rampage that began in Juárez ignited a transnational war. What started as a triple execution evolved into an insurgency. La Empresa's rise marked the rebirth of organized crime as a paramilitary force. Operation Black Warrior exposed Mexico's fragile sovereignty, while Trump's declaration of war on cartels redefined America's southern border as a war zone. With CIA drones, naval blockades, and cyber offensives, Washington transformed its counter-narcotics campaign into a hybrid conflict echoing modern theaters from Ukraine to the Middle East. Yet despite military strikes and intelligence breakthroughs, the cartels adapted, shifting into digital warfare, laundering billions through crypto, and commanding local loyalty through terror and necessity. Civilians, migrants, and law enforcement remain trapped in the crossfire. As Mexico bleeds and the US braces, the crisis reveals a deeper truth. This isn't just a war on drugs, but a battle over governance itself. And the question haunting both nations is no longer if the border war will end, but who will still be standing when it does.